prior to this Secure Act, Will, people used to be able to name their children or their grandchildren as beneficiaries to their IRAs, and those children or grandchildren could then stretch that IRA out over their lifetime, meaning that they don't have to take all the money out in a certain period of time. They just have to continue to take required minimum distributions, but it's not based on the deceased person's RMD table. There is now a single lifetime table for inherited IRAs. And that table hasn't changed, but what has changed is how people can now inherit our IRAs or 401ks, and how that new person who's inherited the money, how those RMDs are treated for them.
Right.
Okay, so the IRS really made this, well, it wasn't IRS, it was Congress. They came out with something, Saul, called the Secure Act.
Yep.
And the Secure is an acronym, as everything else in government comes. It's called Setting Every Community Up for Retirement Enhancement. Okay.
Interesting.
Ed Slott says, if it says secure, you can guarantee yourself that there's nothing in there that makes your retirement more secure. It's something just the opposite. Right?
I would agree with that.
I think of that almost like the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed that has nothing to do with reducing inflation. Yep. In fact, it's probably going to cause more inflation. So under the Secure Act, people who are inheriting IRAs fall into one of three categories. You can either be a non-designated beneficiary or an NDB, or you can be a non-eligible designated beneficiary or an NEDB, or you can be an eligible designated beneficiary or an EDB. All right, so each one of those three types of beneficiaries is going to have a different rule on the RMDs from the IRAs or 401ks that they inherit.
Yeah, it's quite a mess.
It's a huge mess. It's a huge mess. So let's just go to non-designated beneficiaries. So non-designated beneficiaries are not people. They're an estate, a charity, or a non-qualifying trust, which means that they're a non-look-through trust. And if somebody dies before the required beginning date, which is, again, April 1st of the year following the year that you turn 72, all the money has to come out by the end of the 5th year. And there are no required minimum distributions during the 5-year window. But if that owner dies after the required beginning date, then the RMDs must be taken over the deceased remaining single life expectancy table, referred to as the ghost life rule. And, that payout post-death can't exceed 10 years. So in other words, it has to be completely emptied at the end of a 10-year period. Yeah. So just on the non-designated beneficiary, you can see that it's like, what are they doing here? This is complicated.
Yeah, very complicated.
And guess what? If you don't take out the right amount, you get imposed a 50% excise tax.
Yep.
So that's the government at work for you. This is the biggest money grab I've ever seen, this Secure Act.
By far.
It's a way for the U.S. government to get more money into the Treasury without actually raising taxes. They just change some rules on what happens on inherited IRAs, which there's trillions of dollars in IRAs that are going to pass to the next generation in the coming years.
Correct.
And this is a way for them to figure out how can we get our hands on more of that money without actually raising the tax rate.
Oh, yeah, by far.
And oddly enough, it was passed with strong bipartisan support.
Yeah, I remember that. It was, a couple days before Christmas in 2019?
Yeah, and there were less than a handful of dissenters.
Yeah.
Which is kind of crazy. All right, so now you got a non-eligible designated beneficiary. So a non-eligible designated beneficiaries are all designated beneficiaries who do not qualify as an eligible designated beneficiary. Examples of that would be grandchildren, older children, or some look-through trusts. So your non-eligible designated beneficiary, the easiest way you can think about this is your children and your grandchildren. So when your children and your grandchildren inherit your IRA, they have to completely empty that IRA within a 10-year period.
Yeah.
Now, whether or not they have to take a required minimum distribution during that 10-year period depends on whether the original IRA owner died prior to or after their required beginning date.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So if they die before the required beginning date, there's no distributions required on an annual basis. It just says that you have to have all the money out before the end of the 10th year.
Yep.
If the person died after their required beginning date, then that non-eligible designated beneficiary has to take an annual RMD and has to have the account completely emptied in the end of the 10-year period.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay, so who is a eligible designated beneficiary? A surviving spouse.
Yep.
So the surviving spouse can continue to inherit that, and they can continue the RMDs just like they would, but it'll be under the surviving spouse's life expectancy as opposed to the deceased spouse. Minor children of the account owner, but only until age 21, and not grandchildren, right? So can you imagine the normal person in their 70s, they got a child under the age of 21?
No.
No. So this would be for someone who had passed away early.
Right.
It's also available for disabled individuals under strict IRS rules, chronically ill individuals, and individuals who are not more than 10 years younger than the IRA account owner, plus any designated beneficiary, including qualifying trusts who inherited before 2020. The list goes on and on. I've got my manual here, so those of you on YouTube can see this, but this entire manual was devoted to the study of the Secure Act with Ed Slott's Elite IRA Advisor Group. And so we spent 3 days this spring dissecting all of the rules under the Secure Act and how the RMDs for all these eligible or non-eligible or whatever kind of beneficiary you're going to call them. But there are some real gotchas in here that aren't even included in the basic simple part of it that I just laid out. And it's terrifying.
Oh, it's what I think what should be scary for the audience is these rules, according to the IRS, that's on them.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
That's on them.
Yeah. Anybody needs some light reading, I got it here for you. But I mean, I put some nice, colorful language on my Post-it notes here. Some of the things as we're going through and studying this, and I can see so many traps for the beneficiaries of retirement accounts that it's going to get messed up, and it's going to cause big distributions. It's going to cause unwanted penalties, unwanted excise tax, and far more of a person's money is going to wind up in the hands of the IRS, and potentially more than what winds up in the hands of who they actually wanted to get the money.
Sadly.
Starting your route to retirement.